Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is another Frontline update for the morning of the 28th of December 2022. I say morning, it's morning UK time. Cheers, here's your nice cup of tea. Let's get on with the Frontline update and go to the overnight news and other bits and pieces first. Go to the usual Ukraine released figures for Russian losses, caveats, propaganda caveats, inaccurate. Indicative, there are no Russian equivalent figures, all that stuff. Right, 550 liquidated personnel, 1 tank, 13 APCs. That's a real uptick for APCs. 1 artillery system, 8 vehicles and fuel tanks. So pretty, I guess, fairly average at the moment figures for Russian losses, but with the APCs suffering some. And that could be because we saw that video yesterday with the loitering munitions of about 8 APCs being damaged or taken out. That was pretty impressive, and I was wondering what loitering munitions they were. They were quadcopters, so definitely not the Phoenix Ghost, definitely not the Switchblade 600. Could be commercial off-the-shelf ones that they're sort of done up themselves. Someone suggested in the threads it looked like they could be Polish drones, so it'd be interesting if that's the case. Anyway, let's move on. Russia on fire in Novocherkassk, Russia. One of the buildings in a military unit belonging to the 150th Division burned down completely. So again, what that almost certainly is some kind of partisan or disgruntled Russian mobilized soldier or otherwise some kind of soldier doing something against the army or against their command. So always useful for the Ukrainians to see this kind of activity take place. Right, we're going to look at very quickly here a Russian sausage magnate dies after a hotel fall in India. Someone pointed this out to me on the thread yesterday, and now I've seen quite a bit on this. This is a very common way of dying if you're a Russian person of influence and the Kremlin doesn't like you. You accidentally fall out of a window. It's been going on for some time. So this has happened in India. And yeah, it just shows that you can never feel completely safe if you're an expat Russian who doesn't fully agree with the Kremlin narrative. In 2018, Antov topped the Forbes ranking of the 100 richest civil servants in Russia. His income in 2018 amounted to about 9.97 billion rubles, according to Forbes Russia. He was a member of the Russian Parliament's United Russia Party, which was formerly headed by Vladimir Putin, and is still staunchly supportive of the Russian president. Antonov pledged his support for Putin last June when he was forced to deny having posted an anti-war message on WhatsApp. He blamed an, quote, unfortunate misunderstanding and a technical error, and said the status had been deleted, of course. So on and so forth. And there's been a string of deaths, similar sorts of deaths, as the CNN article goes on to detail. In fact, this Twitter thread sums up some of the deaths quite succinctly. So Russians who knew too much about Kremlin's finances and military secrets and from Putin's circle are dying en masse in Russia. Pavel Antonov, richest deputy of the Russian Duma, died in India on the 26th of December. He fell out of a hotel window where he celebrated his birthday. Antonov's companion, Vladimir Bidanov, was found dead in the same hotel 4 days prior to Antonov's death. Alexei Maslov, 69, ex-chief of Russian ground forces, died in hospital on the 25th of December. Alexander Buzukov, 67, died on the 24th of December. He headed Admiralty shipyards for 10 years. They produced submarines and shot Kinzhals at Ukraine. Vladimir Sungorkin, 68, died in the Russian Far East on the 14th of September. He was editor-in-chief of the popular Russian propaganda media Komsomolskaya Pravda. Vladislav Avdivka, 51, was killed in Moscow. Police found the bodies of his wife and daughter in the apartment. Avdivka was the vice president of Gazprom Bank, third largest bank in Russia by assets. Alexander Tuyalakov, 61, was found dead in Leninsky village, where Gazprom's top managers live, on the 25th of February. He was Deputy General Director of Gazprom's SRC for corporate security, and Leonid Shulman, 60, was found dead in Leninsky village, where Gazprom's top managers live, on the 30th of January. Shulman was head of transport service of Gazprom Invest. And there are plenty of others. There was one who died in Spain right back at the beginning, at the same time as someone else died somewhere else around the world. So that's just a very short list. That could be doubled, actually, if you're going to count up all of those important Russians who have died. So anyway, it's just an indication of how difficult it is to be someone who harbors either important information, or harbors opinions that are contrary to the Russian Kremlin narrative. So Peter Clifford here says that the UA the Ukrainian army, has now confirmed 4 Ukrainian soldiers on the special forces mission I reported yesterday, who the Russians said had been killed. That is now accepted by Ukrainian sources as well. And in fact, here's a video of them. I don't know if this is them actually in Russia, probably not, but here are the 4 sort of lads, 3 on camera and 1 holding the camera. It's just a real shame, unless this guy's actually selfieing, and that's only 3 of them. But anyway, this is the group there, or at least most of the group. Sad stuff, but then it's war, and that must be incredibly dangerous. Of all the places to be, behind the lines, so far that you are in Russia doing covert sabotage operations. You must wonder the probability of you living through the next week as being just that kind of assessment. That's brave, no doubt about it. And this is from Poland, a train with US military equipment and generators on the way to Ukraine. This is just a massive train of a whole bunch of equipment, loads of Humvees. America has promised just so many Humvees to Ukraine. Here you see them, lots of other sort of vehicles as well on the way, apparently, to Ukraine. Good stuff. All useful. Over the past day, Russian troops have shelled the Kharkiv region with artillery, tanks, mortars, and other weapons, say the head of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration. And in fact, that has included some S-300 hits on Kharkiv here. Russia bombed Kharkiv city with modified S-300 missiles this morning. So, I wonder how they know that. Well, they've probably got pieces of it around. And B, what does it mean to have a modified S-300? I know these are surface-to-air missiles that are used in a secondary mode to attack ground targets and are less accurate as a result. But anyway, the situation is that Kharkiv is starting to get a little hot in terms of Russian ordnance hitting it. There's been quite a bit of activity on the northern border over the last few weeks, including the odd skirmish. So that's something to look out for going forward. The Ukrainians have said they've hit multiple Russian personnel concentration areas. So it'd be interesting to see details of this as they sort of gradually come out throughout the days after these sort of things happen. So every day you start hearing about the details of supposed injuries and deaths. Ukraine's rocket and artillery forces have hit 2 ammunition depots, 1 control point, and 7 areas of concentration of Russian troops in the past 24 hours. So that could be quite a difficult night's stats for Russia if the Ukrainians have used HIMARS and similar to hit troop concentrations. But then again, Russians are giving back at least some of what they received. This is Russians shelling Nikopol district, which includes Minets as well. So just to let you know where this is, and this is not unusual. So this is Grads and heavy artillery being used 8 times. Now, to be fair, these places get hit every night. So Marinets and Nikopol, they are just over the border, not over the border, they're just over the lake, sorry. And on the other side of the lake is occupied territory, so it's quite safe, I guess, in a sense. The Russians aren't going to be losing territory here anytime soon, barring an amphibious assault, which is highly unlikely. And so, they can just set their artillery up and continually bombard Nikopol and Marnets. So they get quite a rough deal, these places, important industrial towns. But as according to the Ukrainian pictures, so often it seems like it's residential areas that are hit, but they could be selectively providing those pictures, and just to present this narrative that the Russians are only hitting residential areas. That would be kind of what you might expect in the information space. Anyway, let's get on to the front lines. But just before we do, I do want to just mention the ISW assessment of the scenario with military bloggers, nationalist military bloggers in Russia. Really interesting analysis on their daily report. So the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, has stated that the Kremlin will continue to pursue a military solution to the war until the Ukrainian government capitulates to Russia's demands. So they are not looking for any kind of negotiations at the moment, and they're not going to work with the West due to the West's provocative actions, so on and so forth. And then it goes on to talk in some depth about the increasingly integrating select military bloggers into its information campaigns, likely in an effort to regain a dominant narrative within the information space. So they're really important, the Russian military bloggers, mil bloggers, and they have at times been quite caustic and critical in terms of their opinions on the Russian state of command, in terms of the Russians' lack of gains. And the Kremlin has looked at the claims and has adapted to be in line with some of the demands of the military bloggers at times, and at other times, reacted against them. And what they appear to be doing at the moment is bringing them into their fold, and producing these kind of groups that involve these mill bloggers. There are some 50 very powerful mill bloggers, but even people like Rebar, who I use as one of my sources, and other Russian military bloggers have been brought into positions of, you know, official brought into official positions on different groups, and that's a way of Russia being able to control the narrative to some degree. But they don't want to do it entirely, because then they understand that they'll, people will be able to see through that. So the Kremlin has also intensified its efforts to co-opt prominent mill bloggers by offering them positions of power, which in turn allows them to amplify some elements of official rhetoric. Mill blogger has also previously revealed that the Kremlin is now offering to collaborate with the mill bloggers, and this is definitely what's going on, as we've seen indeed with Rebar. A Russian mill blogger who has received a place on Putin's mobilization working group also expressed excitement over the prospect of delivering his concerns directly to Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, who is deeply unpopular, Shoigu, during the working group's first meeting on December 28th. By offering these positions within the government, the Kremlin enforces self-censorship and introduces its narrative to some figures within the military blogger space. Putin's appointment of these mill bloggers to official positions also suggests his approval of their extreme and sometimes genocidal statements. So that's fascinating. The Kremlin could significantly benefit from the integration of some prominent mill bloggers' voices into its information space, but Putin remains unlikely to domesticate the entire community. It talks about 50 really extremely influential mill bloggers from different factions, from among sort of thousands of military blogger Telegram channels. And a prominent Russian mill blogger noted that the mill blogger community had been rescuing the Kremlin's poorly implemented and outdated information campaign, while simultaneously pointing out that it is impossible to centralize such a vast community. Another mill blogger noted that the Kremlin's information efforts are so laughable that it made the mill blogger community the only decent source of information. So I think the Kremlin realizes that they've had a poor track record for dominance in the information space, and so they're trying to, instead of compete with that, take it on board and use it, and also in that way have some kind of influence over the narrative that is produced. So that's a really interesting analysis. I advise everyone to go and read the whole thing. But anyway, let's go to the front line. Sorry, that is an awful lot of preamble. Now, let's go to our usual starting place, which is the northeast, Kupiansk-Svatiove-Kreminna. And actually, there's been a little bit of activity just north of Kupiansk. Just to show you on my map, this is Kupiansk here. We have Svatove down there, the P66 highway that connects Svatove to Kreminna. And up here we have just northeast of Kupiansk, Tavolzhanka, Vilshana, Persha, Travneva. There are some claims that the Ukrainians now hold Tavolzhanka. They definitely have Dvorichna. There's two, Dvorichna and Dvorichne. Um, so no report says no map changes. AFU activity around Vilshana has increased, so Ukrainians are increasing their activity there. Today, the General Staff has announced that Persho-Travneve was shelled east of Vilshana, which makes it plausible that the Ukrainian armed forces are moving forward, waiting for confirmation. Just looking at the deep state map, which is very sort of pro-Ukrainian, has Persho-Travneve here, and the Ukrainians, or at least the grey zone, very close to Persho-Travneve. Now, I have previously been quite generous to the Russians around here and have the Russian line further down south, but it could be that the Ukrainians have been advancing and even have a foothold on some aspect of Persho-Travneve in order for them to be shelled by the Russians. So the ISW has some quite interesting claims. Ukrainian forces have likely made larger gains in the northeast Ukraine than ISW has previously assessed. Ukrainian forces likely captured Dvorichna, Novomlinsk, and Tavolzhanka in northeastern Kharkiv Oblast, and Kolomychika in Luhansk Oblast. So we'll come to that in a second. Given that both Russian and Ukrainian sources reported Russian shelling against these settlements on December the 27th, and ISW have updated its maps accordingly. So that's interesting because they're talking about Dvorichna being likely under Ukrainian control. Well, that's been the case for ages. I've not thought anything else. But Tavolzhanka, on the other hand, and this settlement up here, which I've also had under Ukrainian control for some time, but I haven't had Tavolzhanka. So it'd be interesting if that is under Ukrainian control, as well as making movements towards Persho-Travneve. So if we look at what Rebar, the Russian source, says, I had to get this from the Russian site of Rebar, but weirdly it had an English translation. There's nothing on the English site at all. This is on Telegram. In Kupiansk Center, the overall intensity of fighting noticeably decreased. The sides are limited to mutual reconnaissance and the exchange of artillery strikes. At the same time, Ukrainian command makes up for losses by redeploying mercenaries, that's what it calls, sort of volunteer forces, from the International Legion to the area. So that is really downplaying any possible success of the Ukrainians in this area. So yeah, I think there's movement there. And then if we come further down south towards Svatove, so Svatove's here, not a huge amounts of detail, but the ISW seems to think that Ukraine have control of Kolomychika. So that was what I was talking about the other day. That's been the case for sort of 3 days now, that the claims are on Kolomychika have been sort of bandied about. Here's from the Russian Rebar section again of their Telegram channel, and just a little hint of how to get translations of an image. So if you, this might be of interest to some people, if you right click on that and go search image with Google. So this is a screenshot I took of their Telegram page, and it will come up looking like this. If you go to translate, so in Google Lens translate, it will do a translation of the image. And it will give you a transcription of that to the side as well. So here it just says, this is just on the strikes that have taken place overnight. So artillery strikes have hit positions, so on and so forth, in the Starobilsk direction, in all the places we just mentioned, Tavolzhanka, Novomlinsk, so on and so forth, as far down as Yampolivka down south. So that's just to show you how to get a translation of an image there. Anyway, as we move further down south, let's have a look at null reports of what is happening around Kreminna. So on my map, that would be really, we have very little other information out on what's going on around Svatove. Stella Makivka mentioned often, but really we come down to Chervonopopivka and Makivka, Kreminna. So here's Kreminna, Chervonopopivka, Ploschanka. South of Kreminna, fighting is heavy. Recon units already made it very close to the city outskirts. Ploschanka is also a hot environment, Russia attacked there very big today. There are still fights. This isn't a regular counterattack, but much bigger. So that's interesting. Haven't heard too much else about that, but there is, a big Russian counterattack in Chervonopivka. Um, The ISW says one prominent Russian military blogger reported that Ukrainian forces captured a Russian strongpoint near Chervonopivka, where ISW assesses Ukrainian forces have likely advanced since at least December the 23rd. Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces are regrouping and deploying reinforcements from Kharkiv to resume offensive operations on the Kreminna-Svatiove line and Kreminna city. Defmon, on the other hand, says the AFU repulsed attacks today around Chervonopivka. I believe the AFU lost some ground in this area a few days ago, which is kind of against what ISW said, but possibly regained some of it again. Fighting is taking place close to Dubrova and Kreminna. So Defmon's lines are a bit more conservative, as is often the case. So he has Dubrova partially under Russian control and otherwise contested, but the Ukrainian line's very close, and the encroaching upon Kreminna just to the south in this kind of forested area. And north of that, an attack by the Russians on Chervonopivka, as no report says, but that it was repulsed. Anyway, so that's kind of where we're at with the area around Kreminna. Again, just so many claims about, it's all hotting up around Kreminna, yet a lack of detail coming out of there. Okay, let's move further down south. So this Bilorivka, no information really coming out, well, for me at any rate, around Bilorivka down to Spirny. However, I've moved my maps, as you can see, Russian gains around this Bilorivka, around Berestova, and around Yakovlivka. So the Russians are pushing out from Yakovlivka. Apparently, they claim there's fighting on the outskirts of Vasily. Bilorivka seems entirely taken now, Berestova as well. So less contesting around these areas. The Russians are definitely encroaching to the north of Soledar and Bakhmutska. So it's not looking good from this area here. Let's have a look at some of the usual sources. First, I'm going to go to War Mapper that says a close-up map of the approximate situation around the city of Bakhmut. Russian forces have regained parts of Opitny, which is down to the south, and made some advances around the Bakhmut recycling plant. I'm going to talk to you about that in a second. So it appears that the Russians might have retaken the waste sorting plant there and parts of Opitny as well. No report says some accounts claim that Russia has recaptured 50% of Opitny based on footage whose provenance and date cannot be confirmed. Yes, there is fighting, but do I know? Russia lies a lot. Russia fighting in Soledar, Bakhmutska, and the situation is hard. So this could be a begrudging acceptance that things are not looking good in Bakhmut. So we've had a couple of days of really good news for Ukraine, and then it's the ebb and flow of this battle around Bakhmut. It seems that for a few days the Russians will take control, then a few days the Ukrainians will counter and take control of the sort of outcome there. Defmon says Bakhmut North, Russian finance military blogger Rybar talks about Wagner assaults on Soledar and Bakhmutska. The Ukrainians possibly lost some ground on the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut, but this is unconfirmed. That's sort of telling you about what I was saying there. Again, Yakovlivka. Then this pressure down towards Soledar in a flanking attack, whilst they're attacking towards Soledar and Bakhmut and through Bakhmutska as well. So yeah, things again. The red dash line has moved further to the west. So yeah, not looking great there. And then in Bakhmut South, Rebar also claimed Russia took control of over 5 platoon-sized positions in Opitny, and I have reason to believe this is true. According to the Ukrainians, they repulsed an attack on the direction of Avdivka, which most likely means Russian forces managed to cross the canal again. So this is that canal down by Kurdyamivka down here, and there's an attack towards Avdivka, which is sort of this Bilahora area. I will show you that on my map soon, and Opitny as well. So the ISW say that the Russian forces have moved from using battalion tactical groups to company-sized groups. I talked about that a few weeks ago, and now they've reorganized themselves, the Russians, to actually attacking even smaller groups, to squad-sized groups. The Russian forces similarly degenerated from company and battalion tactical groups to individual squad-sized groups when Russian units in Kherson Oblast became markedly degraded. The ISW assessed that at the time, the Russian military's use of squad-sized groups in Kherson Oblast indicated the Russian offensive had culminated as Russian ground forces were degraded so badly that they could no longer operate elements of echelons high enough to make meaningful gains. Now, why they're talking about Kherson here is that they're saying these are the size units they are now using in Bakhmut. And when they were using these size units in Kherson, it meant that their forces had degenerated to the point of culmination, which is a military term to say that they can't attack any further. Then they're not losing ground. They're not losing the battle, if you like, but they just don't have the capacity and to advance any further and to be on the offensive and to take more ground. So because they're operating those size groups now in the Bakhmut area, this is a sign of culmination. The Russian military's reported use of squad-sized groups likely a result of a prolonged attritional warfare and indicates a degradation of larger doctrinal formations above the platoon level. Russian rate of advances in the Bakhmut area will likely decrease if Russian forces continue advancing at all, unless significant new reinforcements and supplies of artillery rounds arrive soon. So they're talking about a lack of ammunition for the Russian forces as well. And they talk about, intensified offensive operations. At the same time, they say, the long-term prognosis is not looking good here. However, yesterday saw some gains. So Russian sources claim that December 27th, Wagner intensified their activities around Soledar and Bakhmutska and have made ground, as I've already told you. The intensification of offensive operations to capture Soledar will likely further exacerbate the constraints of personnel and equipment that are impacting the Wagner Group's slowing rate of advance in the Bakhmut area. So they're saying, actually, the fact that they are fighting slightly more intensively over the last couple of days to make these counter-offensive gains means that they will come a cropper in a few days' time, arguably. Right, let's go and look at what Rebar say about Bakhmut, because it is sort of all happening there at the moment. And I'm going to translate this one because there isn't an English translation, so sorry about that. Okay, so Rebar say, in the vicinity of Bakhmut and Soledar, intense fighting continues. Ukrainian formations are spreading information about critical situation and a high probability of a defense breakthrough. On the Bakhmutsk sector, assault detachments tried to break through the positions of Russian troops on the southeastern outskirts of Bakhmut. As a result, a group of fighters, the 57th Brigade, were surrounded, escape from which only 8 succeeded. So they're saying that, there's some severe troop losses for the Ukrainians. To restore combat readiness and regain control over lost territories, 250 people from the airborne assault groups and the special forces of Ukraine were deployed to the Bakhmut area. Northeast of Bakhmut, units of the Wagner PMC established control over 2 strongholds in the Pidorodna area, where the formation of the 17th Tank Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine arrived the day before to strengthen the area. To the south, the assault on experienced troops continues, or with experienced troops, not sure. Currently, fighting is taking place at the Art School and the Agricultural Lyceum on Naberezhnaya Street. To the southwest, Russian troops recaptured 3 strongholds on the eastern outskirts of Klishchivka and south of the village, where the forces of the 24th and 60th Mechanized Brigades of the Armed Forces of Ukraine are defending. So, they're reporting lots and lots of gains for the Russians, albeit small gains, and it's just looking more and more difficult for the Ukrainians in that area. Let's just translate the last bit there. So we've got engineering groups of the 28th. I don't know what that word is that they've mistranslated. The Armed Forces of Ukraine are equipping false firing positions for MLRS and artillery at the turn of Chasiv Yar to Druzhba. Not quite sure what exactly that means. In the Soledar sector, assault detachments of the Russian forces are advancing from the Bakhmut secondary school to the Dekonskaya station at the south of Soledar. So this was a school I was telling you yesterday that I was telling you that the Russians had taken control of. At the same time, Wagnerites, and with the support of artillery, are pushing through the fortifications of the armed forces of Ukraine along Sosura Street. In addition, during the fighting from Yakovlivka, control was established over the company stronghold of the 128th Guards Brigade. So they're making progress all up and down there, and it's difficult for the Ukrainians at the moment. In Soledar, we've got geolocated evidence that a Soledar counteroffensive was just another Russian suicide mission, stopped by mortars, artillery, and a single Ukrainian tank. Things may look different in nearby Bakhmutska, though. So Soledar, they're saying actually the Russians lost some piece of equipment here. But on the flip side, we've got in Bakhmut, Ukrainian defenders were able to repel most Russian attacks at the eastern suburbs, however, not without taking heavy material losses. 2 knocked out main battle tanks, 1 M113 and a BMP, so infantry fighting vehicle. So yeah, again, it's difficult fighting for the Ukrainians here, and this is on the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut. And a pro-Russian source here saying south of Bakhmut in the Kupiansk-Svatiove-Kreminna area, troops are slowly approaching Vuhledar. So that's kind of, oh my goodness, so much information. Okay, so we have difficult situation up in Soledar. We've got the school that was taken yesterday in Bakhmutska and advancing from there. We've got advancing in Yakovlivka for a larger encirclement attempt. Although it seems that they're pushing north at the moment, there's no doubt movements to the west as well. As we come down further, Bakhmut, the claims are that the Russians have moved forward from having lost this whole area here. They've actually encroached further to the west and arguably have control over the waste sorting plant, which is, I think, a pivotal position to hold, because you get sighting over the eastern suburbs, but also over the rubbish tip and this kind of flat ground here towards the aggregates area. So that's really important. If the Russians have regained control over that, that's not good news for the Ukrainians. And then it appears that they have fought their way back into Opitny. Deep State map has, which is very pro-Ukrainian, has then controlling 50% of Opitny, as the Russians have claimed, and all of Ivanohrad. So that is not good news for the Russians, for the Ukrainians, if that's the case. So yeah, my map is probably generous to the Ukrainians still, but I just want some more confirmation there. But it looks like they have forced their way back in there. The claims that they're fighting or positions might have been taken on the eastern outskirts of Klishchivka, that has been the same for a couple of days. And that, as according to this pro-Russian source, so we have the canal here, we have Kupiansk there. So if we go back to my map, it could be that the Russians actually have control of this side of the canal and are pushing towards Vuhledar and Avdivka. So I might adjust my maps in accordance with some of those Russian claims. In other words, it's difficult all up and down the whole Bakhmut area for the Ukrainians. Here's just an amazing bit of footage that's worth showing you. This is going into Bakhmut. So on the roads, I believe Ukrainians driving into Bakhmut, you see quite a bit of equipment. You see that helicopters are really active right on those lines. So firing out chaff and flares. You got another helicopter just flew ahead. You got one firing off stuff and then doing its thing. And the smoke from the artillery bombardments, it is absolutely incredible, this footage. I think it gives you a real sense of Bakhmut and yeah, how difficult it must be for everyone involved there. Further footage of inside Bakhmut, and again, it's the soundscape.
Bakhmut.
Just it's heartbreaking, but that's war, isn't it? And this is, what they're putting up with the whole time. Constant sound of artillery barrages. I guess you can never feel like you're safe. You just want to. I'd be wanting to run everywhere. But even in the buildings, of course, artillery is hitting them consistently. So on and so forth. Picking up the pace now. That is, and you're safe. And inside, at least somewhat safe. that is life moving around in Bakhmut. Really, really difficult. So as we come further down south, not too much news coming out from Torets, New York. Avdivka seems to have just completely ground to a halt. Ukrainians are hitting Pisky with artillery. Some interesting analysis from ISW here about this. So a Russian military blogger claimed that Russian forces in Marinka, which is, just to let you know, just down south, but this is to do with Avdivka. So they're saying that the reason they're attacking so hard in Marinka could be connected to try and to get a wider encirclement of Avdivka. So Russian forces in Marinka are not making significant progress. Another Russian military blogger claimed that Russian forces are concentrating efforts to capture Marinka in order to reduce Ukrainian forces' ability to shell Donetsk city, to launch further offensive operations towards a key Ukrainian transport hub in Kurakova, and to better encircle Ukrainian fortified positions in Avdivka. Avdivka city head Barabash reported that Russian forces have notably decreased the number of artillery shells in the direction of Avdivka due to supply issues with artillery munitions. The Russian military's offensive operations in eastern Ukraine have heavily relied on artillery support to augment ground assaults and supply issues with artillery munitions. May substantially impact Russian forces' ability to maintain their current pace of offensive operations in the Avdivka Donetsk area. So basically, the Russians are running out of munitions, so they have not been shelling Avdivka so much. At the same time, they're concentrating a lot on Marinka because this will allow them to sort of circle around. They want to really hit Kurakova, which is a logistics hub, but also allows them to flank Krasnohorivka, and this kind of buffer zone will give them protection, will give Donetsk city protection because it's consistently getting shelled by Ukrainian forces. There are pro-Russian military summary is a Russian YouTube channel says that actually Ukrainians have lost a lot of artillery behind the lines here. He reports very heavily on Ukrainian losses, not so much on Russian losses, but says that the Russians have claimed to have hit X, Y, and Z pieces of artillery behind the lines all the way up and down this front. And so we must obviously be aware that Ukraine will be losing artillery as well as the Russians, and that he says that is impacting the Ukrainians' ability. But as for Marinka, what do we have to say? Oops, wrong one. Sorry. Let's go to Defmon says them. Russians attacked around Krasnohorivka, Vesely, Vodyane, Marinka, and Pobyeda. Their attacks were repulsed by the Ukrainians. Regarding Marinka, Russian Telegram channels claimed that they again had captured 90% of it. They had claimed that a few months ago. At this point, the control is about 50-50. So that's kind of what I've been saying the last few days, which is they make these big claims on Marinka, and it's just not true. There is heavy fighting there. No report says Avdivka, mainly positional combat and mostly artillery. Russian troops have ceased mass attacks in the past 2 days. I'd say a bit longer than that, actually. Marinka is under control. Local sources say fighting continues, and Vuhledar was bombarded with incendiary ammunition. So basically, much of a muchness in Marinka. Heavy fighting going on there. It's a complete ruin. Krasnohorivka, a little bit of pressure around there. And as we come down, Vuhledar is getting some artillery attention from the Russians. Other than that, pretty quiet along the Zaporizhzhia front. There are HIMARS hits behind the lines here, details of which will no doubt come out soon. Kherson is being consistently bombarded. There are artillery duels going on across the Dnipro River. But my frontline update has been far too long, so I'll leave it there. There's a little bit more to say about certain hits behind the lines in Zaporizhzhia. But you can find those the usual sort of sources I use. Go and look them up. It is basically a case of it being a fairly bad day for the Ukrainians in Bakhmut, but the long-term prognosis might be that it's going to be very challenging for the Russians, given ammunition supply shortages, as well as decimation of their forces, or not decimation, but losses for their forces, such that they are operating in smaller squad-sized groups, and that may have an impact on their long-term ambitions for Bakhmut. Anyway, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. And there are all the ways that you can support the channel in the description below. I just really appreciate everyone who does support the channel and watches the videos. Take care, and I'll catch you for a Ukraine war update extra video. Sorry, this one has been so long.